First of all, I want to thank everyone involved for inviting me, and especially Leslie, because she twisted my arm to come and do this. And yes, I've known Leslie when she was an art student, my daughter's friend, and we are also somehow related in the distant past in Syria. Yes, we discovered when my father spoke to her mother, who is just here now. First of all, I have to say sorry to say I'm not an anthropologist, cultural or otherwise, and I'm not an academic, so it's a bit scary for me to speak to you. The first time I was asked by an anthropologist to speak, it was Jack Cuddy, and it was in Cambridge. And am I putting it too near or making a funny echo?
Can you all hear at the back? Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
It's okay?
Yeah, it's
okay.
Fine.
So I just wondered, what do anthropologists want to know? So I read Lévi-Strauss, Le Cru et le Cuit, and when I went there, but he did ask me to talk about the food of my community. In Egypt, it was the Jewish community. And I made little drawings, because I also was an artist, of the types of how our little pies looked and our cakes looked. And when I got there, they were so terribly upset that I brought out this sheet of paper instead of little bites and nibbles to eat. So, I started collecting recipes about half a century ago. And it was when the Jews were leaving Egypt after the Suez Crisis. I was at art school. I was living here with two brothers. One was a scientist, was a medical student, and the other one a scientist. And suddenly my parents arrived and joined us and applied to stay. They came as refugees. And for the next couple of years, I had a couple of decades really, I saw waves upon waves of relatives and family friends stopping in London on their way to their new chosen homeland. They were coming to our house, and we were my mother was always making dinners, and everybody was exchanging recipes. And so there was this feeling that we'll never see each other again. We might never see Egypt again or each other. And one of the things that everybody was asking was recipes. And the recipes, they were saying, do you remember that cake that you used to make? Please give it to me, and I'll always think about you. So there was this thing that I realized just how important recipes were for us at any rate, and I thought for everyone. We had never had cookbooks. Nobody had cookbooks in Egypt. They were, at that time, recipes were just passed in the families. And when I looked at all the recipes, gradually, but I realized that it was a very, very mixed bag. And it was from all over the Middle East and North Africa, because the Egypt that I knew was the kind of mixed cosmopolitan world that you've all been speaking about. And we just took it for granted that this is how it was, but it really was very obvious. Now in Cairo and Alexandria, there were communities of Armenians, Greeks, Italians, Syrians, Lebanese, as well as the French and British communities, the expatriates rather. But our royal family was an Ottoman Albanian dynasty, and our aristocracy was Turkish. So our haute cuisine was Turkish, and we did get to eat it because my parents had friends there. But the Jewish community in particular was itself a mosaic, because many of the people had come to Egypt from all over the Ottoman Empire, when the Suez Canal was built and Egypt became a kind of trading El Dorado of the Middle East. Now, my grandparents came from Aleppo and Istanbul. We spoke French at home and Italian with our nanny, and we went to an English school. But generations of my family, who had lived for hundreds of years in the Arab and Ottoman worlds, had spoken Arabic or Judeo-Spanish at home. Now, I heard the lovely talk about the great-grandfather and his memoir. Now, I have to say, I have found 1,000 letters by one of my great-grandfathers who came from Istanbul, and I have found them in Paris, and I've photocopied a lot of them. Well, he was a young boy in Istanbul when he was chosen to go to Paris to study at the Alliance Israélite Universelle and become a teacher, or he actually became a headmaster and opened Jewish schools in various countries and cities, in Salonika, in Istanbul, in Haifa, and then that's how he came to Egypt as well. And my grandmother was also a teacher there. Now, the other grandfather was Joseph. No, he was Joseph Al-Fandari. My other grandfather was Haham Abraham HaKohen Dweck. And he was the chief rabbi of Aleppo. I kept deciding to bring his portrait here, his photo, because he is there looking like a sultan with actually a whole row of medals. And my father said, you know, all the medals were put on him by hand by Sultan Abdelhamid. So we were all very proud of that. Now I realize after the talks here that I should have been ashamed that my great-grandfather, in a way, was appointed by Abdelhamid. Now, in Egypt, our life was very much about entertaining and visiting, and it was the most important part of our life. And you could tell from the food on the table where families came from. We knew a wide range of dishes from different countries, but there were also foods that we had in common. There were things that now you find in the British supermarkets and some of the things that you had here today. There were the stuffed vine leaves, hummus, aubergine purees, cheese cigars, yogurt with cucumber, lamb meatballs, meat pizza. We called it lahma be'ajin, and Turks call it lahmacun, and baklava. So it is strange to find them all here. They weren't here when I came. It was very, very unusual. Now, in the countryside, our countryside was another world altogether. In villages along the Nile, they had melocheia, ful medames, tarmeya, which is falafel, bamia stew, lentil soup, pigeon stuffed with wheat, and omali. That these now have surfaced in Cairo and in Alexandria with all the people who have come to live there from the villages. Now, there is some words by a Catalan writer called Josep Pla that I really like to quote myself. And he said that cooking is the landscape in a saucepan. Now, yes, I do travel a lot, and I do look at a lot of landscape, and I find that what I can see that grows there, what grazes there, I find it in the market, and I find it in the saucepans, and of course on the plate as well. Now, to me, actually, I always see history in the saucepan and on the plate. And I can, because I've traveled a lot and I've researched many different kinds of cuisine, I not always, but very often, nearly always, know who's been there before. If I see raisins and pine nuts, I know who's been there. But it could be not just one type of people, could be others, but originally, where did that come from? Now, the food on the tables of the countries that were part of the Ottoman Empire, they tell a very complex, multi-layered story. Now, take Lebanon. the cooking is similar to that of Syria, Palestine, and Jordan, and they share a history of foreign rulers who came. And it dates back to the Phoenicians, the Greeks, and Romans. Of course, the Lebanese all love the idea that they are Phoenicians, and I hear it again and again. One of the nice things for me, because I'm interested in the background of food, not only in collecting recipes, I love seeing what people think themselves is who they are and what their dishes are. And then I go and check up to see, is that what they're saying? And it's not far off, usually. Now, in Lebanon, I just find everything that's happened, in a way, has influenced cooking in some way. For instance, Christianity introduced in the Byzantine area, it's resulted in a long repertoire of meatless and vegetarian Lenten dishes that you don't get everywhere else in the Middle East and North Africa. Now, Levantine Muslim cuisine began to develop in Damascus in the 7th century, in the time of the Umayyads. And really, when there is a court cuisine, thank you. Actually, there's some here.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you. Yes, one thing that I find is that when there has been a center of empire, when there has been a grand court cuisine, there is usually a refined cuisine that developed. Even centuries later, you can feel that something there had happened that was grand. But when the Abbasids moved there, or Abbasids, I'm very bad at pronunciation, you can tell me off. When they moved their capital to Baghdad, then Persian cooking traditions dominated in the court. Some Lebanese dishes that people have given me, like meat cooked in vinegar with onions and aubergines, I found that it could have come out of a very well-known 13th century cookbook that was found in Baghdad. So, yes, I did find, when I first came, I went to the British Library looking for Arab cookbooks, because we didn't have any cookbooks, and I thought at least my father will be able to read them. And then the only books, the librarian told me to come back in a day or two when he will have found out what there was, and when I came back, the only things he had were 13th century. 13th century Baghdad, 13th century Damascus, and 13th century from Spain, from Al-Andalus. And it was, so for me, I had a period when all my friends were eating medieval recipes. And so, you know, that was, and so now I can tell, oh, this sounds, and I have to say there were some recipes that were mentioned by Maxime Rodinson, the famous French Orientalist, about his research in cookery manuals in Damascus. He made a list of dishes, and I find some of the names of dishes that we kept eating, and actually the same ingredients. So for me, the great joy, because we thought we just are somehow floating around. We don't have real roots or long things, and there were this recipe that is also you have in your family, I think it is in Lebanon, that people do on Shabbat or something. Now, I'm wondering, but maybe some of you would know, whether the Lebanese melocheia and the Lebanese falafel, whether they were adopted in the time of the Mamelukes. Because I'm not a historian, I don't have that desperate need to find out. But I'm just guessing that it could have been in the time of the Mamluks, who ruled Syria and Egypt for 300 years. Now, one thing that is very obvious is the big Ottoman influence, and it's strong in the coastal cities in the whole empire. but also particularly in Lebanon. Now, the Lebanese standard menu of Lebanese restaurants around the world, it is set in stone. And the items never change. But I have to say that in the cities and in the country, and especially the mountain villages, there is enormous culinary diversity. You would think the restaurants would want to put in some of the home cooking that they could use, but no, because people have got used to this. There's a whole things we can say about restaurant menus, but I was wondering how, in a tiny country, the cooking could be so varied. It is so small, Lebanon. But when I visited, it became clear that because it's a land of high mountains and a long, narrow seacoast with 3 different climate zones, and the roads into what was previously inaccessible interior, now they were only built as recently as 1960s, but the access is still difficult. So the villages nestling in the mountains and valleys have remained isolated from each other, retaining this individuality of their cooking, which is based on local produce. But also, of course, communities have been further separated by their division into many religious and sectarian groups, most of them living in their own villages or in separate quarters in the cities. When I was in Beirut a few years ago, I was at a big party where there was music and it was having a great time. And the librarian of the main library in Beirut just suddenly came to me and said, "Why do you Jews want to eat always differently from everybody else?" And then it started a big discussion because everybody was saying, and I knew because I had eaten in Armenian restaurants, I'd eaten in all kinds of different restaurants where people were all keeping their dishes. So she had to, in a way, understand because everybody was telling her this is how it is. Now, it's also, Lebanon is an extremely fertile country, and most of the population used to live on the land. Since the Middle Ages, the land was divided into fiefs, and the feudal lords lived among their peasants and built themselves palaces in the mountains. And this has meant that a rich rural culinary tradition developed in the mountain villages. So it's very different from anywhere else. And when I went, a lot of people were telling me, "I'll take you to my village. I'll take you to my village." And I imagined an Italian village and arriving. And then I'd arrive, and there was these villas with a Mercedes in the port. And of course, a lot of these were immigrants who had gone off to Africa or Latin America and have come back rich. But and they're still cooking their dishes, but maybe with a more refinement. Now, so there is a very rich rural culinary tradition in the mountain villages, and I was very, very interested. Of course, I spent a lot of time there seeing what they did in the country, in the way of drying things, but I won't say it now because there's more to be said about Turkey. And so, just to say also, I went to Zahle in the Bekaa Valley, and I discovered even before I went, there's somebody with prejudice or preconceived ideas. I didn't know that it was going to be where the famous Lebanese meze was born. Its character was born in Zahle. And so I was hugely thrilled to actually go and eat sometimes. They often said that 40 different mezes were served, and so I really just thought, can I eat these 40? Because as a food writer, I always feel that I have to eat everything I possibly can before I get back, because I never get the opportunity again. But the Bekaa Valley, it is where the vineyards are situated, where arak is produced, and it is because of the arak, because people coming to drink there were wanting to eat something, and this is how it happened. Now, in the late 19th century, when Beirut became a mini cosmopolitan city and a commercial and intellectual center, a Christian migration began from the mountains to Beirut, and the coastal cities where the inhabitants were mainly Sunni Muslims and Greek Orthodox. I think they must have been Shiites as well, because they're now quite a lot. So the Christian and other minorities had lived high up in the mountains, because that's the way minorities survive and also to feel independent. But it is through this meeting of the Ottoman cooking of the main cities along the coast and the cooking of the mountains, the meeting between the urban rice, because rice was very much a thing of the cities, and the rural burghul, or bulgur, as the Turks would call it, that the classic Lebanese cuisine of today took shape. Now, just a few weeks ago, I've recently been to Istanbul to take part in the great British Festival of Creativity. So I was wondering why they had asked me, because I'm not the best person in creativity, because I'm all about tradition. And also I don't go out to eat much in restaurants in London. I wouldn't know who the most creative chefs are, except those who know me and we meet occasionally. But so I kept asking, what am I supposed to talk about? And then just 2 days before we went, Tom Parker Bowles, who was responsible, he just said, let's talk about Istanbul cuisine. And so I just thought, okay. So I phoned my friends in Istanbul saying, will you be on a panel? So within 2 days we had this panel, and the first, one of the people to speak is Nevin Halici, a longtime friend of almost 40 years. She is the first person to have collected the recipes from all over Anatolia. And she's been to every province. Her father didn't want her to go to school because he was very religious. They were from Konya, and he didn't want girls to study. But anyhow, she taught herself. But so she did all these fantastic books, of which she doesn't want any money for. She says she does it for Turkey. And so she spoke about the differences and about also those differences that reflect the geography, the local history. Konya, for instance, I had been to Konya before with a whole lot of gastronomes and as well. I had a long period of going to Turkey, and there I ate a quince stuffed with meat, and an apple stuffed with meat. And I realized then, looking up in history, well, you know, Konya had Persian influences because it was the Seljuk capital in the 12th century, and Isfahan had also been part of the Seljuk Empire. Now we had Aylin Oneytan talked of what is happening today in Turkey. The day before, she had taken a few of us to the spice market, the Misr Bazaar, called after Egypt because the spices used to come through Egypt at one time. Now I'm going to go back to, if I have time, to the kind of things you find in the market, which are the kind of things that are rural products that people make traditionally to keep from one season to the other. Now, we also ate at Chia, a restaurant on the Asian side of the Bosphorus, and we had an endless tasting of regional foods from different parts of Anatolia. first I have to tell you, when we went to the spice market, almost everybody there would go and kiss the hand of Nevin Halici because they saw her photograph in the books and they used her books. So we really felt very proud to be going around. She's very, very shy and very retiring, but it sort of added to the excitement. Now, the owner and the chef owner of the Chia restaurant, he comes from Gaziantep, but he has made it he's still quite young, but he has made it his life interest or thing is to go and research the foods of the regions and also of the ethnic minorities. So he does have, I had been there before, he does have Armenian dishes, Kurdish dishes, and Sephardi dishes, or Sephardi foods. But what is wonderful is he has a lot of the place where he comes from, which is Gaziantep. Now, when I first went to Istanbul many years ago, I remember going with a large group of people to a Gaziantep restaurant. It was the first one. It wasn't, let's say, 40 years ago, but it was several years ago. But I realized that everybody, all the Turks who came from Istanbul, were terribly embarrassed because we were a lot of gastronomes from America, from England, we were there for a big festival, and they were just saying, we don't eat this kind of food. You know, it's garlic, spices, red pepper. It isn't what we cook. We cook a cuisine that's more refined. They saw their food of Istanbul as European. But what is happening now is that all the foods from the regions, whether it is from Black Sea, from everywhere, there are now restaurants who are offering them. I don't know whether it's because there are all the people from the provinces who have come to Istanbul and who would want to eat it, or whether everybody has come to love those foods. But it was really nice. Now, another speaker was at the festival was Vedat Basharan. Now, he's a chef owner and he's also a consultant in Ottoman dishes. And he was the first to rediscover Ottoman dishes and the dishes that were cooked at the palace and also at the homes of the Ottoman aristocracy. I remember eating his, when he was the first, many years ago, he was a chef at the Shiran Palace, and he had already there doing what he called Ottoman dishes. Now, he explained how he adapted recipes from old books. He had to learn how to read the old books in the old script. And he actually, this is now also something that's become fashionable, and other people do what he does. And they do Ottoman modernized cuisine. Now, how did that develop? Maybe I should say something about that. Now, yes, the nomadic Turkic tribes, when they came spreading from their homelands in northeastern Asia into Anatolia, they brought their nomadic diet, which consisted mainly of yogurt and meat. These were the staples. And they also brought stuffed pasta, which is a manti, we'll talk about it a bit later, which they adopted from the Chinese and Mongols. People say the shish kebab are said to have originated on the battlefield when their invading armies camped outdoors in tents. There are so many stories about how dishes were created, but we don't know. But it's a nice idea. But in Anatolia, wheat became the basis of their diet. Now, the sultans, as we all know, placed great importance on their kitchens. And at the imperial capital of Constantinople, of course. When I first went there, I was asking all the chefs, why is it that Turkey cooks so much better than we in Egypt? That they do in Egypt. I didn't say Turkey, Greece, because some people here would say, of course, but yes. And so I was waiting, and the first one, he said, well, you see, the sultans had to satisfy so many women in his harem, so he had to eat a lot. And that was his idea. But no, it's not. It isn't the idea. He wouldn't be able to satisfy them if he ate a whole sheep, because they were saying they had to eat a whole sheep and all that. But anyhow, it was just fanciful, of course, but it was fun to ask. And you must know, those of you who've been to Istanbul, the giant dome kitchens at Topkapi Palace, I expect you do. But also it's written out there for everyone to read that anyway, by the 17th century, on festive occasions, as many as 10,000 people, including the Sultan, his harem and eunuchs, palace workers, viziers, the Janissary corps, members of the Divan, foreign ambassadors and their retinues, they were all fed from those kitchens, and where 1,370 cooks worked. Now, yes, so it is one place where actually in the Middle East where the cuisine was codified, where they actually had recipes that were written down because they had to train chefs and check and all that, how much was needed. Now, so an extraordinary number and variety of dishes were developed in the court kitchens and in the palaces of the aristocracy. Now, some originated in Persian, Arab, Balkan, North African, Slavic cultures that had been absorbed in the Ottoman world. Some were adopted from the Byzantine Empire. So they were, apart from what seems to be the way, they were the result of the unique cosmopolitan character of the early empire and its ruling class, who were members, whose members came from all over the empire and often entered as the Sultan's slaves. Most were Christians or the children of Christians who were converted to Islam. Now, in this unique society where products arrived from the far corners of the empire and palace cooks learned their trade as slave page boys in the palace cooking school, I was very interested in this idea that there were slave page boys in a cooking school. But so somebody who is interested in that might decide to go and research that. But anyway, a wide variety of foods of various origins entered the culinary pool. Now, in the latter part of the empire, the local cooks were not slave boys anymore, but they were recruited in the region of Bolu. All of them came from Bolu, from two towns. I don't know if you pronounce Cerede or Gerede. Anybody? And Mengen. No, big. Mengen. Okay, because according to legend, the nobles were so pleased with the young men who cooked their meat for them in the open after they had spent the day hunting in the mountain forests, that they brought them back to the city, to Istanbul. And it became the tradition for, I don't know whether it's 100 years, I'm not sure, or 200 years, but it became the tradition that all the young men from Bolu, maybe 300, they all went to serve at the palace and in the homes of the nobility in Constantinople. At the age of 12, boys were sent to work in the kitchens near their fathers and uncles. And after 10 or 12 years of working their way up, doing all the preparation work, they could work on their own account as master chefs. Now, when I first found that out, which was 40 years ago, I started asking all the chefs where they came from, even chefs here in England, Turkish chefs, and they did say they came from there. So it's interesting. But now, what is interesting now is that they now have their a university, and the most popular courses or departments are catering and gastronomy. And I met one young man who actually is from there, and he is doing he's very intellectual, just brilliant, I can't really. And his family, they all were dynasties of chefs, of course. And he is doing his researching the archives of Ottoman cuisine. And so it's really, he's also writing a biography of Nevin. So I met him through Nevin. Now, at the same time as this grand style of cooking developed in the palace kitchens, other cuisines blossomed in the homes of Armenians, Greeks, Jews, Albanians, Kurds, and other minorities. And some of their foods have remained part of the rich tapestry of Turkish cuisine. Now, I was interested in the Jewish dishes. A lot of the Jewish dishes originate in Spain, and they have Spanish name, and they are different. They have remained different. They do eat what other people eat as well, so I was very interested to find. I went to a grand restaurant, and I saw something was called borequitas. So I thought borequitas sounded familiar just by the name. And so I ate them, and they were little borecas, but they were stuffed with aubergine and fried onion, and I recognized them. And then when I went to the hotel, I saw a woman who was selling jewelry there, and she told me, after we had been talking, that she was Jewish, and she made those pies, and she sells them to the restaurant. So there's all kinds of ways now that old dishes from different ethnic communities go in. I've heard a whole lot of other ways that they've gone in lately, which is interesting. But now, when the Turkey became a republic, the huge kitchen staff at the palace lost their jobs. Now, some opened kebab houses, offering so-called saray, means palace food, which means kebabs of different kinds and meze. Now, others became makers of specialties like pickles or puddings. The cooks who worked for the aristocracy that moved to Egypt, because a large part of the aristocracy did move to Egypt, and a lot of them went with their employers. And so that is why a lot of this grand cuisine did appear in Egypt. And then when I was researching and asking friends of my mother's who were of Turkish origin originally, they were giving me recipes like sherkaseya, which is Circassian chicken. Now, it was a hot dish with a walnut sauce, creamy walnut sauce. And I put it in my book. But when I went to Turkey, everybody said, no, it is a cold dish. And it is, you chop up the chicken, and it is a meze. And I did eat it as a meze. So I realized that some things in Egypt remained as they were in the past, and in Turkey they're different. Have I got time to do another?
Just
5 minutes, okay. Now, there's a high degree of specialization in food trade, and it's a legacy of the organization in the palace kitchens, where cooks were entrusted with one type of food only at the time. They were making just kebabs, or just soups, or just jams. And so now you do have pideci's, do you say pideci's, specialized in lahmacun, the type of pizza. Borekçi specialize in pies. There are those who are muhallebichis, who make milk puddings, and so on. And also those who do cured meats and sausages, cured fish, all the things that maybe I won't mention, but you know from the market. Now, many of the old dishes have disappeared with the old chefs, but many of the chefs today, strangely, are still from the towns of Cerede and Mengen, where there is this university. Now, do I have to mention some of the dishes that are? Shall I mention some dishes? Okay. Now, who are grand dishes? Because suboregi, which is baked pastry with creamy cheese, it's still around. Manti or mante, and they're like tortellini, pasta stuffed with minced meat, with a yogurt sauce poured over and a sprinkling of melted butter and red pepper. There's a lamb stew served with hunkar beyendi, is that correct? And it's a bechamel-like aubergine sauce. Each pilaf, rice with raisins and tiny bits of liver. And just the other night together, where are you? Who reminded me of the quails encased in and cooked in aubergines, which somebody has just recently eaten. These are very refined foods, and there are a whole lot of foods that you don't usually find in restaurants, but are beginning to find, like fruit cooked, meat stews cooked with fruit, such as quince, apricots, sour cherries, chestnuts. I saw the restaurant on Wednesday night did have sour cherries, did they? But maybe in the pudding only. But there is some things that I was very interested, because in Egypt we did a stuffed leek, which you just take the leeks apart and you use only the layers to make long stuffed leeks stuffed with minced meat, and they're cooked in a tamarind sauce. They've got a sweet and sour flavor. So we did it, and we knew it came from Aleppo, from our families in Aleppo. But I was very surprised when somebody in Turkey told me, oh, that's an Ottoman dish that's coming back. So it is very interesting. There are the kind of things, apart from the usual muhallebi that you see everywhere, but there is the tavuk goksu, which is shredded chicken breast, which tourists are always, they never guess that it's a milk pudding, a milk dessert, which is made with shredded chicken breast. Well, I think now, I don't want to go on and on. I want to listen to any questions.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.